Morning, everyone.
Good morning,
Good
everyone.
morning.
We are learning Mishnah's Bava Kamma, Perek Zayin, chapter 7, Mishnah Zayin, Mishnah 7. Ein Megadlin Be Medaka Beretz Yisrael. This Mishnah is going to be a list of Gezeres Rabbanan, rabbinic decrees that concern animals. Ein Megadlin Behe Medaka Beretz Yisrael. We may not raise small domestic animals in Eretz Yisrael. Small domestic animals means sheep and goats. So there was a takana not to raise these small domestic animals in Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because they might damage crops. These animals, like sheep and goats, they wander around. They go into other people's properties and they eat what grows there. And therefore, there was a time when they had this decree not to raise these kinds of animals. Now, let me read to you here from the notes. The sages wished to strengthen Jewish settlement of Eretz Yisrael. For this reason, they prohibited raising small animals there, because these animals tend to destroy vegetation that farmers have planted. If you want to promote living in Eretz Yisrael, you want to make it as positive an experience as least problematic as possible. Now, the Mishnah only mentions not to raise the small domestic animals. However, raising large animals, such as oxen or horses, is permissible, even though they also damage crops. I guess they get around too. This is because large animals are needed for work, carrying burdens, pulling plows, and the sages avoided making laws that would be too difficult for the people to keep. Small animals, on the other hand, were mainly used for food and could be brought in from other countries. That's how they bring down here the notes from the Meiri. And it's very clear that the way the Mishnah says, this halacha, this law only applies to a small animal, not to a large animal. And the Meiri says, although the problem exists by both, nonetheless, the large animals, to say that you have to import the large animals also, that would be too much of a burden on people. Next. So the Mishnah continues, after saying that you can't raise these kinds of animals in Eretz Yisrael, Ava Megadlin B'Surya, but you can raise them in a place called Surya, which is not part of Eretz Yisrael. Surya here refers to, as they have here in the notes, this was a place called Aram Tsova, which was north of Eretz Yisrael, which David HaMelech conquered, King David conquered. And if we're saying that you can raise these kinds of animals in Surya, which means we don't care if over there the animals are going to damage the crops, that is because, according to the time of this Mishnah, this area does not have the status of Eretz Yisrael itself, and therefore you can raise the animals there. And if the animals go into somebody else's property and eat their things, what do you got to do? Pay for it. That's what you got to do. But to forbid raising those animals there, that they didn't do. And also it says, of a midbarish of Eretz Yisrael, you could also raise them in the wilderness areas of Eretz Yisrael, where there are no crops there. There won't get any crops going to be damaged, and therefore in these desert areas there's no crops, there's no problem of crops getting damaged, and therefore in those areas you would be able to raise these small domestic animals. Then the Mishnah continues, one may not raise chickens in Yerushalayim because of the sacrifices, because of the offerings. Now what that means is that we know there are certain meat of sacrifices that don't need to be eaten at the Beis HaMikdash. They can be eaten within the whole Yerushalayim. Now, if chickens can be raised in Yerushalayim, the chickens of those times tend to peck in garbage dumps. And there was a concern that while pecking in the garbage dump, they may make the sacrificial meat impure. Why is that? So let me read to you from here. The meat of some offerings, shlamim, such as a shlamim, do not have to be eaten in the Beis HaMikdash, but could be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim, provided that it was tar. The sages were concerned that chickens which pick at piles of garbage might pull out a piece of a dead sheretz. A sheretz is one of the certain types of creeping creatures that transmit tumah when dead. So it's going to peck in the garbage heap, going to pull out a piece of a dead sheretz, bring it in, and carry it around and touch a piece of carbon meat, and that would make it tame, impure, and also to eat. So therefore, to prevent this, the Chachamim prohibited raising chickens in Yerushalayim. And when it came to Kohanim anywhere in Eretz Yisrael cannot raise chickens because of the virus, because of the truma, right? Truma that Kohanim eat has to remain pure. So the same problem that we have if there are chickens around in Yerushalayim because they can make the sacrificial meat impure, we have a concern. They make the truma that goes to the Kohen. Truma is what we separate from the grain for a Kohen. It's only allowed to be eaten by a Kohen. A Kohen can only eat it if it's pure. And therefore, again, we're concerned that chickens are going to bring a dead piece of sheretz into where the Kohen is, come into contact with the truma, and make it impure and forbidden to eat. And therefore, they decreed that Kohanim in all of Eretz Yisrael would not be able to raise chickens. Next, Ein megadlin chazerim b'chomokim. One may not raise pigs in any place. Now, in any place sounds like anywhere, not just Eretz Yisrael, but anywhere. Now, what was the reason for this decree of not raising pigs? So the explanation here is, this decree resulted from an incident that took place when Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, sons of King Alexander Yanai, were fighting each other for the crown. One held Yerushalayim while the other besieged the city. Every day, those inside the city would lower money in a basket over the city wall, and the besiegers would take the money and place lambs in the basket for the 2 daily tamid offerings. You have to bring the karbanis, the carbon tamid, the daily sacrifices, which were supposed to be lambs. So they would basically lower the money, and then they would put and the besiegers would put the lambs in the basket. One day the besiegers wanted to disrupt the sacrificial service, so they placed a pig in the basket instead of the usual lambs. When the pig reached halfway up the wall, it stuck its hoofs into the wall, and the entire Eretz Yisrael shook. At that time the sages declared, "Cursed be the man who shall raise pigs." So therefore, that's why we say here, no raising pigs anywhere. Next. Lo yigadol adam es hakelev elimkein hayakasha b'shalshelas. One may not raise a dog unless it's tied up with a chain, because an untied dog might frighten a pregnant woman and cause her to miscarry. Now here in the notes they bring from the Tosfos Yantif, the prohibition applies to fierce dogs, which bite and bark at people they do not know. So those dogs, they have to be tied up, and it says tied up with a chain. I guess that means you got to make sure they don't get loose. But the point is that they need to be tied. They have to be tied up because otherwise they might frighten a pregnant woman, cause her to miscarry. But if they're one of these kind of cute, cuddly little dogs that don't, hurt anybody, then there's no problem of raising them. Okay. Now, ein parson nishbim layonim, which means we may not spread traps for wild doves. Ela imkein hayalrochik min hayishuv shleishim ris, unless it's distanced from where people live. Yishuv means a settled area. It has to be distanced from the settled area. Shleishim ris. Shleishim ris is a certain distance. Okay, so we say it like this: you're spreading out these traps in order to catch the wild doves. In order to make sure that you don't end up catching domestic doves owned by people who will fly around, but they come back home. Right? If you're going to set up that trap within an area that they fly, you may end up trapping a privately owned dove, not a wild one. Therefore, if you're going to set those traps, you have to set them at least 30 ris away from the settlement. At that point, the doves don't tend to travel more than that. They don't tend to travel more than 30 ris away from where they basically reside, where they live, and therefore, if it's not, don't set up those traps within 30 ris, because you may come to trap a domestic dove, but more than that you may. How much is a ris? So they bring down here, 30 ris is 4 milin. These are all measurements from the that are mentioned in the Gemara, the Mishna, the Gemara, and 4 milin is 8,000 amis. Thus, based on the various opinions regarding the length of an amma, 30 ris is between 2.4 and 2.9 miles. That's how far you got to distance it to make sure that you don't end up capturing doves that might belong to people who live in the area. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.